Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm doing a good old-fashioned book haul, so I thought I'd pick out anywhere between 10 and 15 of some of the most recent additions to my shelves. Let's just get right into it, starting with a classic. That would be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is a classic Gothic novel from the 1930s. It's often considered the blueprint for how we understand a lot of the Gothic genre today, and so many of my favorite Gothic horror stories take inspiration from Rebecca, so I've been very curious about it for quite some time. The story follows a young orphaned heroine working as a lady's companion when she meets a handsome widower named Maxim de Winter on a trip to the south of France. He very quickly proposes marriage to her and whisks her away to his brooding estate on the Cornish coast, where he suddenly begins acting like a very different man compared to how he was on their trip. And it also seems as if he's determined to keep the memory of his dead wife, Rebecca, alive in any way he can. That basically aligns with everything I know about this classic. I know it's very beloved. As I said before, it's often cited as a major inspiration for so many dark, unsettling Gothic stories of today. Things like Mexican Gothic, The Hacienda, and The Little Stranger, just to name a few. While I would not call myself a reader of classics by any stretch of the imagination, I have been having a little bit of a classics renaissance lately, so this will be nice to have around when the urge to read a classic strikes next. On a very different note, I also wanted to talk about Medea Sang Me a Corrido by Dalia de la Cerda. I received a galley from Feminist Press, but I believe it was already released on June 16th. This is supposed to be like strange Latina litfic. It reimagines the figure of Medea as a Mexican anti-angel of birth and death. It's set in the mythic country of Aztlan, where military violence and drug violence run rampant, and everyday people are just struggling to survive. That's where Medea comes in. She's a deity with punk rock flair, part midwife, part gravedigger, both timeless and incredibly ancient. She basically spends her days helping folks with abortions, finding their children, burying their dead, and generally just trying to help the tragic victims of the state who are caught in its unending cycles of violence. This is one of those books with a very lofty synopsis that doesn't actually tell you much about the plot of the story itself, so that was my best attempt at piecing together a description. But honestly, it had me at Mexican anti-angel of birth and death, so I actually know all I need to know in that sense. After that, I pre-ordered one of my most anticipated YA releases of the year. That was The Bloody and the Damned by Becca Coffindaffer. This is described as a queer dystopic fantasy perfect for fans of Iron Widow and Hell Followed With Us. It's about a world known as Trinity, which is a metal planet where the rich live up in the skies and everyone else fights for access to water down below in order to survive. The main character, Val, knows all about doing whatever it takes to survive. They've sacrificed everything to take care of their younger sisters by using their outlawed teleportation powers to gain notoriety as Trinity's most infamous assassin for hire. No one should be able to connect them to their identity as the Butcher, but when things go horribly wrong on a routine mission and Val's sisters are kidnapped in retaliation, they realize that someone must know their secret. So now if Val wants to get their sisters back alive, they'll have no choice but to turn to their ex-childhood friend turned vigilante thief for assistance. This is very much up my alley, to say the very least. So many good buzzwords in this synopsis. I love gritty dystopian adventures starring queer heroes. I love badass teenage assassins and vigilante thieves. It just sounds like the story's gonna go to some really cool places, and I can't wait to find out what it's all about. These next two books I bought from an indie bookstore in Nashville when I was visiting some friends there. The first is Our Rogue Fates by Sarah Glenn Marsh. This is a queer fantasy adventure about ex-best friends Griff and Moll. Griff is training to become a warden so he can hopefully become half the hero his father was, and Moll is in the business of whatever or whoever can put good money in his hands. The two of them haven't spoken in years after a really bad fight caused them to go their separate ways, but when Moll begins plotting an attack on his shady boss, Griff gets tangled up in the whole mess and has a pretty bad accident that leaves him close to death. Moll decides to make a deal with his boss to both earn his freedom and ensure Griff's safety. So now he has 4 weeks to retrieve an ancient treasure from a remote swamp known for its ghostly and beastly dangers. And naturally, Griff decides to accompany him on his journey along with their other childhood friend, Alice. I've had this one on my radar for quite some time. I think I initially found it on social media where someone, maybe the author, had pitched it as a Lord of the Rings type quest if Frodo and Sam were canonically gay for each other, which I would argue they are, but is otherwise an ingenious pitch. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the front of the book, there's actually a blurb from Sean Astin himself, which I think is absolutely wild. Even if I only had that pitch and that blurb, I honestly would not need to hear anything else. And in that same bookstore trip, I also picked up Project V by Park Sol-yeon, translated from the original Korean by Jean Peng. Park Sol-yeon is the author of A Magical Girl Retires, which was a really fun spin on a magical girl story that I quite enjoyed. I had no idea she'd had another one of her books translated to English. I believe it's a YA sci-fantasy story that that somehow involves mechas. The story follows a robotics student named Kim Woo-ram, who is a world-class engineer and pilot. Her skills are highly sought after by robotics companies around the world, but she decides to return to Korea after learning about Project V, a top-secret government project that requires only the best of the best. Much to her disappointment, she realizes that only male pilots are invited to apply for this project. So she decides to impersonate her twin brother, Boram, and apply for Project V, the reality competition show that will determine which contestant will get the chance to pilot the robot known as V. Listen, if there's one thing in this world that's a super easy sell for me, it's anything to do with mechas. And this sounds like a really delightful sci-fi romp that pulls in a high-stakes reality competition show with a dash of she's the man type vibes. I'm really into all those concepts that it's pulling together, so that's why I couldn't leave Nashville without it. Next, I actually have a special edition of You Did Nothing Wrong by C.G. Drews, which I pre-ordered from Owlcrate. This is, I believe, C.G. Drews' adult horror debut. It's about a single mom named Elodie who feels like she's living in a fairy tale. She's met a devoted and handsome man named Bren who has whisked her and her autistic son Jude away to a family house that he's planning to renovate into a new home for them. So she has a new husband, a new home, a new baby on the way, and everything seems great. Then Jude starts claiming that he can hear voices in the walls, and those voices are telling him that the renovation is hurting the house. Eventually, Elodie realizes that there must be some kind of truth behind this because strange things are indeed starting to happen, but then she has to wonder whether something is off with the house or possibly with her son. The wild thing is that I still have yet to read anything by C.G. Drews. I think I actually own all of their traditionally published books so far, which again is kind of wild considering that I don't really know if I'm going to vibe with their work. My instincts tell me that I absolutely will, but I just don't know yet. Anyways, I always love a good twist on a haunted house story, and this one sounds really interesting. I don't super love the original cover for the US edition, which is why when I saw a sale on this really cool special edition, I didn't even think twice. Next, in the realm of Be Gay, Solve Crime, Tor.com kindly sent me an arc of The Killing of a Chestnut Tree by Oliver K. Langmead, which comes out on October 27th. This sounds like it might be the first installment in a queer gentleman detective novella series. The story follows a well-known consulting detective known as Havelock Harper, and even though many of the cases he's worked on have been published in the papers, he makes sure to keep his more fantastical cases out of the public eye, including the fact that he's in love with his devoted companion, Major Sebastian Wright. The two of them receive news that the Duke of Farleigh has been killed, and Havelock has been summoned to the secluded Farleigh Forest to solve the case. But when they arrive, they discover an even stranger mystery is afoot. Somehow the trees of Farleigh Forest have begun to speak, writing words into their leaves and bark, and the victim himself turns out to be one of those trees. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times, but I love a good Holmesian mystery series, especially when they're queer. And not only does this novella have that going on for it, but it's also presenting a really curious murder case that I really want to puzzle over alongside the characters. Next, I have another arc, and that is Thoughts Be Bloody by Auden Patrick, which comes out on September 15th from Daw Books. I want to say I first heard about this in Vico Ortiz's newsletter because as someone who works in the book space as a voice actor and also runs a virtual book club, they will occasionally talk about books and new book releases. This, I believe, is a blend of queer dark academia, fantasy, and classic retelling because it's a magical retelling of Hamlet. The story is set at Elsinore, one of the most prestigious universities in the secretive magical world, and the summer before his sophomore year, Horatio walks into the library to find Carson Hamlet, resident golden boy and master magician, holding his father's dead body after he was killed under very mysterious circumstances. A year later, Horatio is just trying to keep his head down and graduate when suddenly the ghost of Hamlet's father appears and places a curse on both Horatio and Hamlet. Now the two of them have to avenge his death by destroying Elsinore itself, or else the ghost will rob them of their minds, their memories, and their very souls. Listen, this is another case where I honestly do not need to know anything else. I love a good Shakespeare retelling, even more when it's a Hamlet retelling, and even more when it's a queer Hamlet retelling. It kind of feels like this book was assembled in a laboratory just for me, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully diving into it very soon. This next book I bought myself as a little treat when I had to report for jury duty actually several days in a row. And they would give us like an hour to an hour and a half lunch break every day, and there was a bookstore super close to the courthouse. So one day I just answered the siren's call, and as a treat for not absolutely losing my shit, one of those days I picked up The Witch Below the Dreaming Wood by H.G. Perry. You might have heard me mention this one before. It's a historical Arthurian fantasy set in Wales starting in 1941, right in the midst of World War II, when all of a sudden people all over the world start having dreams about King Arthur. And these dreams are spreading like a fantastical plague, invading people's minds night after night. Whispers about dragon sightings and strange lights appearing over Stonehenge begin surfacing as well, and self-proclaimed prophets begin saying that all of these things are signs that King Arthur is finally going to return now that the country needs him most. Our main character, Elaine, doesn't believe in magic or miracles, and she's never once dreamed of Arthur herself. Instead, she's actually dreaming of Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, and her dreams portend not salvation, but a return to the darkness of Camelot's final days. Again, if you know anything about me, you know I love Arthurian legends. I love Arthurian retellings or reimaginings. I may or may not have had a slight hyperfixation with Arthurian myth growing up, so this is another book that feels perfectly aligned with everything I need in my life. This next book is one I've already read, but it was recently re-released, maybe for the second or third time actually, with a beautiful new cover. That is, of course, the paperback edition of The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which recently was re-released from Bramble on August 11th. This is a historical fantasy and romance. It's about a young lady named Antonina who longs to take her place in high society, find a suitable husband, and leave her checkered past behind. The problem is that she is often the subject of social ridicule because she possesses telekinetic powers, and to make things worse, she cannot control her own magic. One night, she meets a famous telekinetic performer named Hector who shows her what her life could look like if she were able to harness her abilities. So naturally, she's instantly drawn into his circles. But little does she know that he is intent on courting her as well, not because he actually wants her for a wife, but because she belongs to the same household as his former flame, who he is intent on winning back. I read this book a few years ago, and it still stands out to me among Silvia's incredibly impressive backlist. If you love the drama, the romance, and the high social stakes of a really good period piece, I can guarantee that you will absolutely be swept up in this. It has all that delicious, breathless drama you would expect from a story like this, but with mental magic put into the mix. This next book is a little bit of a change of pace, but it's an arc of The Telephone by James Gleick, which comes out on November 10th from FSG Books. This is a hefty nonfiction book that's sharing a comprehensive history of the telephone, as you might be able to guess. It's supposed to explore how the telephone was one of the most monumental inventions in modern history and how its invention presented new possibilities for connections between humans in every possible area of life. So I believe the author is looking at how the phone, through all its different iterations throughout the years, has impacted human history and human connection, and how even though its function has dramatically changed, its legacy is still deeply ingrained in our various networks. Even though nonfiction isn't always one of my most read genres, I do enjoy a good nonfiction book every now and again, especially the kinds that are hyper-specific studies or histories into a specific topic. So the fact that this book is promising to dive deeply into the history, technology, and legacy of the telephone is actually really exciting to me, and I think it's going to be great. Penultimately, just the other day, I was gifted a finished copy of Summer Coven by Kat Hillis and Rosie Thor, which comes out soon from Berkeley on August 25th. This is the sequel to Dead and Breakfast, which was a really fun, zany, queer paranormal mystery about two vampire husbands, Arthur and Sal, who want nothing more than to open up their own cozy bed and breakfast. But right before they're set to open, the mayor is found dead in their front garden with 2 puncture wounds in his neck, which obviously makes them look like suspects. This second book is about how Arthur is trying his hand at becoming a private detective by helping to find their friend Brody's missing mom, but the investigation is interrupted when a local pet psychic is poisoned and killed. It turns out this pet psychic was a member of a powerful witch coven that sells their charms for a price. So now Arthur and Sal will have to solve this new murder, find their missing person, and avoid becoming the coven's next target. I read Dead and Breakfast last year, and I thought it was absolutely delightful. It was a really fun mix of cozy mystery and paranormal buddy comedy in some ways. I always enjoy reading about adorable screwballs trying to solve mysteries wildly out of their depth, and this seems like another dose of exactly that. Lastly for today, and most recently, I was lucky enough to get an arc of Adam Mine by Kay Ancrum, which comes out from Harper Teen on September 8th. This is another one I've mentioned before. It's a queer YA historical reimagining of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The story follows Victor Frankenstein, who wants nothing more than to prove his genius to the world and prove the viability of his research, which is about reanimating the sick and dying so that they can come back to life. Of course, no one takes him seriously, and after an especially drunken night, he makes a bet with his peers to finally prove his research, and in his desperation, he kidnaps a teenage boy from a nearby village to experiment on him under the cover of night. When the boy, Elias, wakes up, his voice is gone, his skin is scarred and stitched, he's been branded with strange symbols, and whatever dark alchemy Victor performed on him has made it so that they can feel each other's pain and joy and regret. And as the two of them are bound together in this way, even as they both search for a way to destroy the other person, they will continue to blur the lines between what makes a monster and what makes a man. Not to sound like a broken record, but Frankenstein retelling is another one of my buzzwords that summons something deeply primal and foundational within me. I love Frankenstein to my core. I will happily read and watch anything that even remotely draws any inspiration whatsoever from the original classic. And I can actually reveal that my patrons voted for me to read this in August, so you'll get to find out my thoughts on it very soon in my August wrap-up. So there you have it. Those are a handful of my most recent acquisitions. As always, if you have any strong feelings about which of these I should read first, or if I've convinced you to add any of them to your own TBR, I would love to hear from you down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!